for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson. I'm your host today. Katy Steele and Jack Prince are both off this week, and I'm not really sure about next week either. We'll keep you apprised of what's happening on our official Facebook page. But I'm going to be flying solo today. I'm going to be talking about Donald Trump, and the more that comes out about Donald Trump, the worse it's starting to look for him. Also, Mike Lindell gets thrown out of the Republican Governors Association. We'll talk about that. Plus, Rhode Island is going to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour. We'll tell you when that happens in just a little bit. Before we get started with today's show, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime you like at Spreaker.com or at Stitcher.com by doing a search for Southpaws. We're on Apple Podcasts by doing a search for Southpaws, and once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, WOOL Bellows Falls, Vermont, KEPJ San Antonio, Texas, and we want to send a special shout-out to WNHN Concord, New Hampshire for downloading last week's episode. We hope you stay with us for the weeks and months to come here. And again, for those of you listening on your local Pacifica station, please, if you have the time or the money, please donate both to your local Pacifica station. They could always use the help. Right now, somebody else who could be using a lot of help is Donald Trump. I have this story. This is Bess Levin writing for Vanity Fair magazine. This is dated May 26th. As you've no doubt heard by now, on Tuesday, the Washington Post broke the news that the Manhattan District Attorney has convened a grand jury to hear evidence against Donald Trump. According to legal experts, this is a major development in Cyrus Vance Jr.'s criminal investigation. As former Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Royfee told the Post, it's unlikely the Vance's office would have taken such a step without believing it can prove Trump, the Trump Organization, or a Trump Organization executive committed a crime. Royfee said, quote, the prosecutors are convinced they have a case. That's at least how I read it. End of quote. As former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara told CNN, quote, it's significant. They must have come across some evidence as to somebody's state of mind, that the misconduct they were investigating does not seem to be the product of negligence or recklessness or mistake, but intentional criminality. End of quote. And as a result, people surrounding Trump are said to be more than a little freaked out, as they probably should be. So, yeah, this is the investigation by the New York Attorney General into the Trump Organization. Now it's gone to a grand jury. This is really not looking good for Trump at this point. According to Political Playbook, which spoke to members of Trump World after the news came out, there's definitely a cloud of nerves in the air. And I think that's an understatement there. One advisor told the outlet that while Trump is no stranger to legal issues, this situation feels different, in part because prosecutors are pressuring Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg, who's described himself as Trump's eyes and ears at the company, to flip. Wouldn't that be nice? Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of people, right? An advisor told Politico, quote, I think the Weisselberg involvement and the wild card of that makes the particular situation more real because there's no sort of fluff and made-up fictional circumstances around the guy. The fact that they're dealing with a numbers guy who just has plain details makes people more nervous. This is not a Michael Cohen situation. End of quote. According to Politico legal affairs contributor Josh Gerstein, the grand jury, quote, is expected to go beyond assembling records by hearing live testimony from various witnesses, which will give prosecutors an opportunity to present a narrative that could persuade jurors to return an indictment in the coming months. Coupled with Attorney General Letitia James's recent decision to team up with Vance and Vance's hiring of veteran mafia prosecutor Mark Pomerantz, the move to a new grand jury suggests a steady progression toward criminal charges against some person or company in the Trump orbit. End of quote. And of course, they're referring again to New York Attorney General Letitia James. Of course, despite the fact that Trump may very well be privately shitting himself over the news, his public response was a typical meltdown and rehashing of things he said in the past. Namely, that all of this is a witch hunt, and that he's a saint beloved the world over. You know my thoughts on that. Yep, that's it. In a statement he wrote, or more likely dictated to some poor scribe, quote, this is a continuation of the greatest witch hunt in American history. It began the day I came down the escalator in Trump Tower, and it's never stopped. This is purely political and an affront to all the almost 75 million voters who supported me in the presidential election. And it's being driven by highly partisan Democrat prosecutors. New York City and state are suffering the highest crime rates in their history, and instead of going after murderers, drug dealers, human traffickers, and others, they come after Donald Trump. Interesting that today a poll came out indicating I'm far in the lead for the Republican presidential primary and the general election in 2024. End of quote. I tried to put my best Trump accent on it. I don't know how well it went over. As for Trump's actual political aspirations, he will undoubtedly tease another White House run until the very last second before making an actual announcement, though aides have claimed to Politico that he's missing being president terribly and supposedly gets angry when people question if he's serious about running again. He's also inserted himself in the 2022 midterm elections, despite the fact that his endorsements are actually the kiss of death. Here's what Politico wrote. With an eye toward winning back the House and Senate in the 2022 midterm elections, Donald Trump has begun crafting a policy agenda outlining a MAGA doctrine for the party. His template is the 1994 Contract with America, a legislative agenda released ahead of the midterm elections in the middle of Bill Clinton's first term. And as a cherry on top, he's teaming up with its main architect, Newt Gingrich, to do it. In recent weeks, Trump sat down with the former House Speaker as well as his former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, at his private Mar-a-Lago club to begin crafting the document, according to a source familiar with the meeting. The group is still just beginning to hammer out the details of what a Trumpified contract might look like, but it is likely to take an America First policy approach on everything from trade to immigration. The source described it as, quote, a policy priority for 2022 and beyond, end of quote. Now that is the Politico article going back to Vanity Fair. Presumably, anyone looking for Trump's endorsement would have to sign the Trump contract in blood, though according to analysis by Bloomberg, candidates hoping to actually win a seat might want to avoid Trump's stamp of approval. While his endorsement helped Republicans win primaries in 2020, 40 of his 183 endorsed candidates lost. And in 2018, the Republicans could have picked up at least 11 more House seats and 4 more in the Senate had Trump stayed on the sidelines. So there's that, folks. Unbelievable. The new contract with America, I only imagine, is probably on orange paper. Maybe he wrote it in crayon, too. Now, I might joke about signing the contract with America in blood. The construction paper, orange construction paper and crayons, whatever. There's one thing that I'm not going to joke about. Well, at least not quite yet. Folks, this is a study that just came out. This is from Reuters, dated May 24th. Folks, if you think that violent conservatives are off the chain insane, here's proof of it right here out of Washington. A majority of Republicans still believe Donald Trump won the 2020 U.S. presidential election and blame his loss to Joe Biden on illegal voting. That's according to a new Reuters Ipsos opinion poll. The national poll conducted May 17th through 19th found that 53% of Republicans believe Trump, their party's nominee, is the true president now, compared to 3% of Democrats and 25% of all Americans. About 1/4 of adults believe the November 3rd election was tainted by illegal voting, including 56% of Republicans, according to the poll. Wow. The figures were roughly the same in a poll that ran from November 13th through the 17th of 2020, which found that 28% of all Americans and 59% of Republicans felt that way. A Democrat, Biden won by more than 7 million votes. Dozens of courts rejected Trump's challenges to the results, but Trump and his supporters have persisted in pushing baseless conspiracy theories on conservative news outlets. Let me just clean up that language for you, and let's put it in layman terms. You've got Trump and his minions going on Fox Propaganda Channel, on Newsmax, on OAN, and they're lying. They are liars. There was no illegal voting except for the ones voting for Trump. We proved this in stories over the election. The guy that is accused of murdering his wife, I believe out in Colorado, submitted, can you believe this? Submitted an absentee ballot and forged her name to it to vote for Donald Trump. This is why I say violent conservatives. They're violent. They're all violent. Every single goddamn last one of them. There's your proof. Proof, folks. The Reuters Ipsos poll showed that 61% of Republicans believe the election was stolen from Trump. Wow. Only about 29% of Republicans believe he should share some of the blame for his supporters' January 6th deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol. No, let's call it what we've been calling it. Treason. They're traitors. They tried to overthrow the government, a legally elected democratic government. They're traitors. Period. End of story. Still, 67% of overall respondents say they trust election officials in their town to do their job honestly, including 58% of Republicans, according to the poll. The November and May polls were conducted online in English throughout the United States. The May poll gathered responses from 2,007 adults, including 909 Democrats and 754 Republicans. The poll has a credibility interval, a measure of precision, of about 4 percentage points. By the way, the reporter for Reuters was Chris Kahn. So there you go, folks. 53% of the Republican Party, according to this poll, believes that Trump is the real president, whatever that means. 53% of Republicans are insane, nuts, psycho, touched in the head, cuckoo, Cuckoo, cuckoo. Hell, I might as well just play the cuckoo since I've got it here. 53% of Republicans have lost their ever-loving mind, or whatever is rattling around in their skull that's supposed to be a brain. Who knows what it is. But there's more. There's even more when it comes to Donald Trump. I have this story. This is Ben Pickman writing for Sports Illustrated. Wait, what? I hardly ever read anything from Sports Illustrated, but this is important. This is dated May 26th. In early 2008, Donald Trump offered U.S. Senator Arlen Specter what appeared to be a bribe if Specter dropped his push for a congressional investigation into the Patriots' Spygate scandal, according to ESPN's Don Van Natta Jr. and Seth Wickersham. That would be the New England Patriots. According to ESPN, Specter once told Charles Robbins, the ghostwriter of his final book and a former aide, quote, "On the signal stealing, a mutual friend had told me that if I laid off the Patriots, there'd be a lot of money in Palm Beach," end of quote. Specter, according to transcripts obtained by ESPN, replied, quote, "I couldn't care less," end of quote. Although the exchange was published in Specter's 2012 book, the senator did not identify the friend. However, Robbins tells ESPN now, quote, "I was pretty darn sure the offer was made by Trump. At the time, it didn't seem like such an important moment. Back then, Trump was a real estate hustler and a TV personality," end of quote. Let me add scam artist, too, my opinion. Continuing the story here. Shannon Specter, Arlen's son, said to ESPN, quote, "My father told me that Trump was acting as a messenger for Patriots owner Robert Kraft. But I'm equally sure the reference to money in Palm Beach was campaign contributions, not cash. The offer was Kraft assistance with campaign contributions. My father said it was Kraft's offer, not someone else's. He told me about the call in the wake of the conversation and his anger about it. My father was upset when such overtures would happen because he felt as if it were tantamount to a bribe solicitation, though the case law on the subject says it isn't. He would tell me these things when they occurred. We were very close," end of quote. Kraft and Trump, both responding to ESPN through spokespeople, have denied involvement in any effort to influence Specter's investigation. Jason Miller, a senior advisor to Trump, told ESPN, quote, "This is completely false. We have no idea what you're talking about," end of quote. A Patriots spokesman told ESPN via email, quote, "Mr. Kraft is not aware of any involvement of Trump on this topic, and he did not have any other engagement with Specter or his staff," end of quote. Trump and Specter had been friends, with Trump first donating to one of Specter's campaigns in the early 1980s. Trump would go on to donate more than $11,000 to Specter's campaign committees and referred to Specter as a close friend in handwritten notes. Specter died in 2012, just 1 year removed from serving 30 years in the U.S. Senate. Patriots coach Bill Belichick, who this past January was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Donald Trump, but declined to accept it in the wake of the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, was fined $500,000 for his role in the Spygate incident. The team was fined $250,000. They were docked their first-round pick in the 2008 NFL Draft for videotaping an opposing team's signals from an unauthorized area during a 2007 game. Gee, criminals mingling with criminals. That's not a surprise, is it? Birds of a feather, peas in a pod, whatever type of metaphor you want to use. This is what you got here with Donald Trump. Peas in a pod, birds of a feather flock together, you know. Unbelievable. And speaking of, here's some good news for a change. This is Ed Mazza, overnight editor of the Huffington Post, writing this article here. This is dated May 26th. MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell was reportedly given the boot from an event for Republican governors late Tuesday night. Gosh, that makes my heart feel good. Politico reported that Lindell had picked up his credentials for the Republican Governors Association meeting in Nashville, only to be told he was not welcome at any official RGA events. An unnamed source told Politico, quote, "These events are for RGA members, and Mike Lindell is not currently an RGA member," end of quote. Right-wing commentator Todd Starnes confirmed the report on Twitter, saying Lindell told him that his VIP credentials and pass had been revoked. Earlier in the day, Lindell said he was planning to confront two Republican governors at the event, Brian Kemp of Georgia and Doug Ducey of Arizona. Donald Trump lost both states in November, causing him to attack the governors and spew wild and disproven conspiracy theories about the election in those states. People like Lindell have bought into the big lie and continue to push it forward. Lindell said on Steve Bannon's podcast, quote, "I don't know how you sleep well at night, Doug, and Kemp's even worse," end of quote. Like I said, they're nutty. They're all nutty. Kemp, Lindell insisted without evidence, is hiding something. That's a direct quote, hiding something. Lindell also said, quote, "I hope I get him one-on-one tonight, him and Doug, and be able to say, why? Why would you do this to America?" End of quote. God. Delusional. Lindell also suggested that the two governors may have a chance at saving grace if they would just believe his conspiracy theories. According to Starnes, Lindell blamed the two governors for his ejection from the RGA event. Dominion Voting Systems is suing Lindell for libel for $1.3 billion over his debunked claims of voter fraud. He is also among a number of far-right figures banned from Twitter for violating the platform's civic integrity policy with those conspiracy theories. Lindell recently launched his own free speech platform in retaliation, but has already made it clear that he won't allow speech he doesn't like. So Mike Lindell is just proving he's just as bad as Facebook, as Twitter, Instagram, whatever platform you want to use. He's one and the same. He's just not as big and not as powerful yet. And that needs to stop. That needs to be nipped in the bud right now. Because this speech from Lindell and other far-right violent conservatives is dangerous to this country. You've heard it here from me. It is dangerous. I'm sorry. This is speech that should not be protected. Period. Lies are not protected in court. You can be sued for libel if you print it. You can be sued for slander if you spoke it. Sorry. That's all there is to it. It's not protected speech. Nor should it be. All I want, folks, I want truth. I want facts. That's all there is to it. What Mike Lindell and others are spewing is hogwash. It really, truly is. These far-right violent conservatives are going to ruin this country. They already have. Speaking of, there was an alert that came out on Thursday, May 27th. This is from Inside Radio. Listen to this, folks. Premier Networks has announced who's taking over for Rush Limbaugh. They have announced that it will take two people to replace Rush. Clay Travis and Buck Sexton will take over the noon to 3 slot previously occupied by Rush Limbaugh. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. The show is expected to begin June 21st, branded as the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. So you've heard it here. They've already have started. This is just going to be more drivel, a lot more drivel. You know what? I kind of want to mention the next story here, but you know what? I'm going to save it for last because there's a little bit of a moral to the story here. In the meantime, let's go ahead and continue to something else here. We've talked on this show for months and months and months about police officers being violent. You know, we're of the belief all cops are bastards. And we've even read an article written by a former bastard cop who admits he was a bastard. I have this story. This is Emma Meyer writing for Newsweek. This is dated May 25th. The Texas Rangers are investigating a shooting involving an off-duty officer and a woman who said that she was shot 6 times by the officer while on her way to the hospital on Sunday. That is according to KXXV. This is something else, folks. Now it's not just the on-duty cops you have to worry about. It's the ones that are off-duty as well. Are we going to be safe going anywhere in public with these yahoos running around? They think this is the Wild West. We just had Texas this week. Their governor is getting ready to sign, if he hasn't already, legislation. You're going to be in a constitutional gun rights state in Texas. You will be able to carry a gun of any kind, no permit necessary. That should scare the hell out of you folks. Don't expect me going to Texas. Not anytime soon. You can just forget that idea. And I've got family that lives in Texas. They won't be getting a visit from me. Like I said, not anytime soon, if ever. And if Michigan continues the path they're down, I'll leave Michigan too. I'll go out east. I'll go somewhere where there's sense. And apparently those areas are starting to get to be few and far between as it stands. Let me continue this story here. Again, this is Emma Meyer writing for Newsweek. In Copperas Cove, Texas, just an hour north of Austin, Lucretia Murray told KXXV she was feeling ill and was driving herself to the hospital Sunday afternoon when a silver truck went around her and then drove slowly in front of her. In order to get herself to the hospital faster, she went around the silver truck, which proceeded to follow behind her closely. Murray said that she pulled over at a stop sign. She then got out of the car holding on to her hip area, which was in pain. She went over to confront the driver. She said, quote, "As soon as I did that, he pulled a gun," end of quote. Murray recalled running back to her car to try and leave. She added, quote, "He just started shooting. All I could do was lean over, and he hit me 6 times, end of quote. According to a news release by the Copperas Cove Police Department, authorities responded to a call about a shooting around 12:43 p.m. and found that an off-duty officer had been involved. The female driver, according to the police press release, was taken to Baylor Scott and White Hospital in Temple with gunshot wounds that were non-life-threatening. As reported by KXXV, Murray, wearing a hospital gown, returned to the crime scene later to retrieve her cell phone from her car. Murray recalled that she had no idea the man with the gun was an off-duty police officer. According to her, he only pulled out his badge when bystanders pulled out their phones to film the incident. She added, quote, "I'm a victim that got shot by an off-duty police officer that did not identify himself. For no reason. I didn't approach him. I didn't threaten him. I didn't do anything. He just opened fire for no reason." End of quote. The Texas Rangers are now investigating the case and have not given evidence to support Murray's description of the events. That's according to the Killeen Daily Herald. A spokesman for the Copperas Cove Police Department confirmed to the Herald that the officer in question is currently on administrative leave. Newsweek reached out to the Texas Rangers for comment, and they never heard back from them. So yeah, they're trigger happy. Hell, that ought to be their theme song, is Weird Al Yankovic's Trigger Happy. They think this is the Wild West. The problem is the Wild West wasn't the Wild West. Somebody needs to do something about these cops. Now. Right now. This drives me crazy. We don't need the officers armed to the teeth. They weren't like that in the 50s. Not at all. Now they've got all sorts of weaponry. They have a taser. They have their service. They have a backup. They're weighted down with all sorts of things, but collapsible baton, handcuffs, bulletproof vest, you name it. I mean, we talk on this show, Katy especially does, what's going to happen when they start getting exoskeletons? Because that's going to be next. Do we really want local law enforcement to be armed with an exoskeleton? I mean, it's insanity. Absolute nutty insanity. Well, I tell you what, I got some more good news to report here. So let's get to this. This is Travis Pittman writing for the Associated Press. This is dated May 22nd. At least we got rid of one Republican talking head, or one violent conservative talking head. Listen to this, folks. CNN has cut ties with contributor and former Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum, according to multiple reports. It comes about a month after a speech in which Santorum said there was nothing here when the United States was founded, a comment which angered Native Americans and others. Huffington Post first reported the parting of ways, citing a CNN senior executive. Other outlets later independently confirmed the move. In an April 23rd speech before Young America's Foundation, a conservative youth organization, let me add, violent conservative youth organization, because all conservatives are violent, period, end of story. Santorum said immigrants created a nation based on the Judeo-Christian ethic from a blank slate. Really? We're going back to that horse shit. This country was not founded on Judeo-Christian ethics. Somebody has obviously not read their history. Unbelievable. Here's what Santorum said. Quote, "We birthed the nation from nothing. Yes, there were Native Americans, but there isn't much Native American culture in American culture." End of quote. No, because we've killed off all the Native Americans except for, what, there's 10 million left, and there used to be hundreds of millions of them. We killed them all. Seriously, we did. White people killed them. White Anglo-Saxon Europeans. That's period, end of story. Oh. By the way, Santorum's comments were swiftly criticized. Santorum himself was invited onto Chris Cuomo's CNN primetime show to explain himself. Santorum said he misspoke in the sense that it wasn't clear that he was speaking in the context of the founding of the United States government. The National Congress of American Indians called for CNN to fire Santorum after that appearance on Cuomo's show. The group's president, Fawn Sharp, called Santorum's comments arrogant, which they were. Hell, human beings are arrogant to begin with, and I might expound on that in a little bit. Sharp said, quote, "I was optimistic he would own it, he would recognize it, and he would apologize, but he did none of those things," end of quote. Well, I wasn't optimistic about it. I know what Santorum's like. I've been covering him for years. The CNN executive who spoke to Huffington Post indicated that the network leadership also was not happy with Santorum's response on Cuomo's show. The executive, according to Huffington Post, said, quote, "None of the anchors wanted to book him, so he was essentially benched anyway," end of quote. So, yeah, wave bye-bye to frothy on CNN. And for those of you that want to know what I mean by frothy, go on to Google or whatever browser you're using and type Santorum as a noun. You'll get an education. Just don't do it while you're drinking something because you might shoot it through your nose. Or if you're easily offended, don't be eating lunch when you read it. That's your warning today. So there you go. Oh my gosh. Well, I got some more good news here. This is Christian Winthrop writing for the Newport Buzz out of Newport, Rhode Island. This is dated May 20th. Governor Dan McKee, joined by Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos, House Speaker K. Joseph Sakarshi, Senate President Dominic J. Ruggiero, Representative David A. Bennett, and Senator Anna B. Quezada, today signed into law legislation which raises the minimum wage in Rhode Island from $11.50 an hour to $15 an hour, and that's going to be spread out over the next 4 years, and we'll get to the details here in just a moment. Governor Dan McKee said, quote, "Raising the minimum wage will benefit thousands of working Rhode Islanders and families across our state. This boost in wages will go back into our local economy, supporting small businesses and our communities. I commend Representative Bennett, Senator Quezada, and all the advocates who worked hard to get this bill across the finish line. This is an important step in the effort to help lift Rhode Island families out of poverty and support many of our essential workers who put themselves at risk to keep our state running during the pandemic." End of quote. The bill will increase the minimum wage from $11.50. It will go to $12.25 on January 1st of 2022. The following year, it will go to $13, then $14 the year after that, and then finally $15 on January 1st, 2025. Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos said, quote, "Rhode Islanders deserve a living wage, and this legislation will help us get there. I want to thank Representative Bennett and Senator Quezada for their leadership, along with Speaker Sakarshi and Senate President Ruggiero, for moving this important legislation forward. The pandemic has shown that many in our state don't have a safety net, and raising the minimum wage will give our residents a greater sense of security." End of quote. Representative David A. Bennett, Democrat, District 20, Warwick, Cranston, who was the House bill sponsor, said, quote, "At last, Rhode Island is on the path toward breaking the cycle of poverty for those at the bottom of the wage spectrum. Minimum wage has not kept pace with inflation over the decades, and our neighboring states have already taken this step toward making it closer to a living wage. This legislation is a long time coming, the result of many years of advocacy by many on behalf of working people. I'm very grateful to my colleagues in the General Assembly and the governor for enacting this bill for the sake of hardworking Rhode Islanders, many of whom do critical work in health care and other essential services, and who were asked to put their own lives at risk during the worst of the pandemic. Today, we are committing to a more livable wage for our constituents, because working families deserve the dignity of being able to support themselves on their wages." End of quote. Senator Anna B. Quezada, Democrat, District 2, Providence, who was the sponsor in the Senate, said, quote, "Raising the minimum wage lifts people out of poverty, particularly women and people of color who are vastly overrepresented at the bottom of the wage scale. It will mean fewer children spending hours alone every day because their parents work 2 or 3 jobs to pay the rent. It will mean fewer people suffering from homelessness or food insecurity. It will mean more money spent at local stores and businesses and more reliable income for landlords. Getting individuals and families to a level of income that more closely aligns with today's cost of living will also ease the demand on public assistance. Raising the minimum wage makes our state a safer, healthier, and more prosperous place to live." End of quote. The Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training estimates that the new law will raise wages for approximately 70,000 workers by 2022 and approximately 140,000 workers by 2025. Rhode Island now joins Massachusetts and Connecticut in passing legislation to gradually increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So there's some good news. I still don't think it's happening fast enough. They could raise the minimum wage right now to $15 an hour. Oh, but it might hurt businesses. Well, you know what? If you can't run your business paying people a living wage, then you don't deserve to be in business. You're getting rich on other people's labor. Gosh, we've talked about this on this show, on other shows that I've been a part of. And people still support business owners that pay their employees poverty wages. And I don't get it. I don't understand it. Why are you supporting somebody who wants to put their thumb on top of your head and just squish you down? It makes no sense. Stop doing it. You've been brainwashed for decades and decades. Knock it off. As we wrap up the month of May and go into June, June is Pride Month, so I have a couple of stories here that kind of go along with Pride Month. This first one is Heather Walker, writing for Wood Television out of Hastings, Michigan, which Hastings is not very far from where we record the show in Grand Rapids. Several Hastings high school students are upset after LGBTQ pride flags were removed from the classroom. The district says having flags that are unrelated to the school, country, or curriculum are against policy. Now that policy is being reviewed thanks to organized action by a group of students. Earlier this week, more than 100 students walked out demanding change to ensure they feel included. Junior Lucy Jenkins told News 8 Thursday, quote, "It's inevitable that we are here, so having those flags taken away was kind of like taking away that sense of community." End of quote. The group of students who organized the walkout all identify as members of the LGBTQ community. So when teachers were told by the district to take down pride flags in their classrooms last week, the students say they immediately felt less safe. Hannah Van, also a junior, told News 8, quote, "There's just a lot of people who are hateful toward our community and it just hurts us. It's not okay at all. And having the pride flag being taken down kind of says to the hateful people, they won against us, and that's not okay." End of quote. Sophomore Zara Franklin added, quote, "I know I can't change the world, but I want to feel safe at school. I want my friends to feel safe at school. And even if someone still decided to say they don't agree with how I identify, I would rather that happen and they respect me than not." End of quote. Instead of stopping the peaceful protest, the high school principal and the Hastings area school system superintendent attended to hear what they had to say. Superintendent Matt Goebel said, quote, "I sat down with many of these students after school probably for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I was just listening to their concerns over the policy. Obviously, this means a great deal to them, and if it means a great deal to them, it means a great deal to me." End of quote. Goebel says it's his job to make sure all students feel safe, respected, and a sense of belonging while following school policy and procedures. Goebel said, quote, "I truly believe that that's not a fairy tale story. I truly believe that we can make sure that everybody feels safe, respected, valued. And those are things I strive for here as a leader in Hastings." End of quote. He says he will take the policy to the school board for review. Hannah Van said, quote, "Some people are like, my school is so small and in a red town. How am I going to get my message across? And we are kind of proving that you can do that within a small community." End of quote. I tell you what, that is good on these students that they protested. And I'm even more impressed with the adults that they sat down and actually listened to these students. Now let's see if they follow through and change the policy and help these LGBTQ plus students feel safe, especially in a small town like Hastings. I'll just say my opinion here. Hastings is a very small town. It's bigger than the town I grew up in, but there's a lot of, how do I delicately say it, old-fashioned values in Hastings, and maybe that needs to change a little bit. I have one other story about Pride Month coming up. This is Juwan J. Holmes writing for LGBTQNation.com. This is dated Monday, May 24th. Kellogg's released a new cereal for Pride Month, Together with Pride, which has rainbow-colored cereal hearts in the colors of the rainbow flag covered in edible glitter. Kellogg's announced the cereal last month, and right on cue, several religious right and anti-LGBTQ groups are trying to boycott the conglomerate for daring to support LGBTQ people. Second Vote, a consumer organization that claims to be the conservative watchdog for corporate activism, called the company, quote, "a poor choice for values-conscious consumers," end of quote, for partnering with the LGBTQ group GLAAD. Deriding the Equality Act, which would add sexual orientation and gender identity to federal anti-discrimination laws, as, quote, "an unprecedented attack on freedom of expression that will force religious organizations to validate every aspect of the LGBT agenda," end of quote. Second Vote claims Kellogg's has, quote, "caved to ideological pressure from the left," end of quote, by making the cereal. So making a cereal, you have now caved to ideological pressure. Good God. The group wrote on its website, quote, "instead of buying food coloring soaked hearts coated with glitter, Consider a healthier offering from a different brand that serves its customers instead of bowing to far-left activists. End of quote. By the way, they wrote this under a picture of actor Raymond Braun and actress Trace Lysette holding a previous Pride cereal by Kellogg's. That must have been the All-Together box of cereal. Again, because I think Together with Pride just came out within the last week or two, if it's even out yet. I don't eat a lot of cereal, so I don't go down the cereal aisle very much. But I think I'm going to get a box of this. Why not? Second Vote rates companies based on how much they lean to the left or right. Kellogg's has a 1, indicating it is liberal, as opposed to the brands Post and Flour Foods, which got a 3 for neutral. God. Hey, but if any of you watched the Food That Built America, you know the CW Post is the one that ripped off all the cereal from Kellogg's when he was at the sanatorium in Battle Creek. The Ruth Institute, an anti-LGBTQ hate group led by longtime marriage equality opponent Jennifer Roback Morse, deemed the cereal another product of, quote, a radical agenda that targets children and families. Oh, God damn. Morse said, quote, not only are they pushing the LGBTQ agenda, they're directly subsidizing it, end of quote. She mocked the company for supposedly, quote, virtue signaling to the cultural elite and everyone who buys into its agenda, end of quote. She continued to whine, quote, they're saying we're nice guys. We love everyone. Buy our product. Apologies to Tony the Tiger, but great it's not, end of quote. The Catholic organization American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property has started a petition against the cereal claiming, quote, pro-homosexual agenda is rearing its ugly head in your children's cereal, end of quote, and calling the cereal, quote, sickening and perverted, end of quote. No, if you want sickening and perverted involving the Catholic Church, why don't you take a look at your priests who are molesting altar boys, and girls for that matter. The sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church, that's your abomination right there, not a box of cereal. Good God. The TFP claims to have over 21,000 signatures on their petition, which directs a message at Kellogg CEO Steve Callahan saying, quote, I am disgusted by your company's new cereal promoting unnatural sin. Homosexuality is not something to be promoted or celebrated. Promote purity and virtue, not lust and vice. End of quote. Yeah, let's see. 21,000 morons signing this petition. I'll just call you what you are. You're stupid. Just like the 53% of Republicans that think that Donald Trump is the real president and that Biden stole the election from illegal voters. I'll just call you what you are. Stupid. LifeSite News, which was recently banned permanently from Facebook in addition to YouTube, published an article complaining that the cereal has pronoun options on the box, referring to a space on the top which allows consumers to write their pronouns on them. LifeSite News claimed that this is Kellogg's attempt to ensure children, quote, can go woke just after waking, end of quote. The article then added, quote, it is important apparently for children to think deeply about gay issues at breakfast, end of quote. This is not the first time Kellogg's has released something for the LGBTQ community that earned conservative backlash. Just having LGBTQ people in their commercials has sent anti-LGBTQ people into a frenzy. By the way, for every box purchased, Kellogg's is donating $3 of the suggested retail price to GLAAD. Here's how you do it, though. You have to upload your receipt to the website. We will post the link to this story so you can get to the Kellogg's website, because this is amazing, and I'm supporting it. I think I'm going to go get a box of cereal right now. I have one article that we're not going to have time to address today because it's an extremely lengthy article, but we have it posted to our official Facebook page. If you go to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show, you'll see this story by the Associated Press. It's a topic that we've talked about on the air for some time now. The headline reads, "Deep-rooted racism and discrimination permeates the U.S. military." So the Associated Press talked to several current and former officers in several branches of the U.S. military, as well as some enlisted folks. And they're talking about their experiences with each branch of the military. The Associated Press also talks about some of the things that the Defense Department is doing to try and combat some of this racism and discrimination in the military. So this is a very wide-ranging article, so please check it out today. Go to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. We might actually cover this on our next show. I want to end the show with this story. This is a study by the University of North Carolina School of Medicine out of Chapel Hill. This is dated May 20th. Listen to this, folks. American politics can be stressful and confrontational, which can lead to anger, as longtime listeners of this show can testify to. The combination of intense stress and negative emotions can trigger potentially fatal cardiovascular events in people who are susceptible to these health issues. But the direct link between a stressful political election and an increase in cardiac events hadn't been established until now. A new study in the Journal of the American Heart Association is the first to show that exposure to a stressful political election is strongly associated with an increase in potentially life-threatening cardiac events. Lead author Lindsay Rossman, Ph.D., Assistant Professor of Medicine in the Division of Cardiology at the UNC School of Medicine, said, quote, "This retrospective case crossover study was conducted in North Carolina, which was a swing state in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. People living in North Carolina were exposed to a particularly high volume of negative political commercials, advertisements, and campaign events that were very intense in rhetoric. So their stress levels may have been especially high leading up to the 2016 election." End of quote. The study looked at data from implanted cardiac devices of 2,500 patients at 3 points in time, a 6-week span leading up to and following the 2016 U.S. presidential election, and 2 control periods that consisted of a 6-week span from June to July of 2016 and a 6-week span from October to November of 2015. Rossman and her team found a 77% increase in the risk of arrhythmia, an abnormal heart rate or irregular heart rhythm, during the 2016 election period compared to the control periods. Rossman said, quote, "The increase in risk was significant, even after taking into account known risk factors for cardiovascular disease, such as age, hypertension, health behaviors, and other medical conditions. Researchers found a significant increase in the risk of both atrial arrhythmias, like atrial fibrillation, and potentially life-threatening ventricular arrhythmias." Rossman said, quote, "We also found a higher burden of atrial fibrillation during the election, and this is important because it can increase your risk of blood clots, stroke, and other heart-related complications." End of quote. The study also looked at whether registered Republicans or Democrats experienced more arrhythmias during the election period, and if political concordance, whether a person's registered affiliation matched the election results of the county they live in, had an impact on arrhythmic events. Rossman said, quote, "We were not able to conclusively show that the election was more stressful for one party over the other because of the size of our study. Risk of heart events increased for people no matter their political affiliation, race, or gender. But we did see that registered Democrats experienced nearly twice as many heart events as Republicans, which is a trend we would like to explore further." End of quote. When it comes to political concordance, those who were politically discordant and may have felt socially or ideologically disconnected from their community experienced a significant increase in arrhythmic events during the 2016 election. But there was also an increase in risk for people who aligned as politically concordant. The consequences of increased cardiac events due to stressful elections could be significant. With U.S. presidential elections happening every 4 years and midterms every 2, Rossman says more research on the subject is needed to study the population-level health impact. She and her team hope to perform a similar study on a nationwide scale of stress and cardiac events during the 2020 U.S. presidential election. And they have a note at the end of this study that it was supported by a grant from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the National Institutes of Health to Rossman. Support for the data linkage and database management was provided by the North Carolina Translational and Clinical Sciences Institute. So those are the disclaimers there. Why do I bring this up? It's because I don't know about you, but I get stressed out every time that there's something involving politics in the news. Whether it's what's happening in Israel, trying to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, whether it's Biden and the Democrats wanting to play nice face with violent conservative Republicans, whether it's Donald Trump and his stupidity or the stupid people that follow Donald Trump. Sorry, I'm just calling you what you are. If you follow Donald Trump, you're stupid. But it even drives me crazy, and I've covered this for 9 years. If you actually want to go back to the original podcast that started before Southpaws, 11 years. And I've always been politically active. And it's something that I forget to do a lot of the time. And that is to stop, shut everything off, and do something enjoyable with your life. If this show gets stressful on you, just turn it off for a little bit. Go outside, breathe some fresh air. Smell some flowers that are growing in your yard. If you've got pets, spend time with your pet. Don't be like me and stuck on this stuff forever, because this probably will kill me. I hate to see that happen to any of you listeners out there. So while you do need to remain politically active and socially active in your communities and in the country for that matter too, take some time for yourself and heal yourself. Because if you're sick, you're not doing anybody else out there a favor that might need you. And that's a reminder that I wanted to express today. And that's going to wrap things up for this episode of Southpaws. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. For Katie Steele, Jack Prince, and Kristen Cook, please support independent media and the First Amendment.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.